Hello there! Welcome to the abandoned mining town of Cerro Gordo. Back in the 1800s, this town was the largest producer of silver for the state of California. Back then, the miners pulled nearly $500 million worth of minerals out of these hills around me. And that's a lot of ore, and transporting that ore anywhere was extremely hard, especially given the location. Because right now, I'm standing at about 8,200 feet in elevation. To get here, you have to take a 7-mile mountain road that twists and turns all the way to the valley floor below us. And back in the day, the main transport hub for all this ore was a town called Keeler. And Keeler back in the 1800s was a bustling port city. They had steamships, they had a railroad, they had dozens of factories and all sorts of people. These days it shrank quite a bit, but there's still a lot of history there. So in this video, we're gonna take a trip down to Keeler, understand its history, its connection to Cerro Gordo, and even talk to some of the people that still call the town home. So let's go take a look. Figure back in the 1800s, the only options for getting up and down Cerro Gordo Road was pretty much mules or horses. That's how guys like Remy Nadeau made their living, becoming the king of the desert freighters. This isn't the 1800s, so luckily I have different modes of transportation to get down there. So I'm gonna get on my dirt bike, head down to Keeler, and we're gonna learn all about it. Welcome to formerly Owens Lake. This field that I'm standing in used to be a lake that was 7 miles across and 60 feet deep in places. And that lake was the key to shipping the ore from Cerro Gordo. And that lake and that ore is the reason that all this development is behind me. So originally, Keeler was called Hawley, and Hawley was mainly a shipping hub. And the reason it existed was because Mortimer Belshaw, the main owner up at Cerro Gordo in the 1860s and 1870s, needed a way to ship his ore across this lake to then bring it into Los Angeles. And originally, he had to use a town called Swansea, which is a few miles up the road, and Swansea was controlled by a different company. And Belshaw, being the enterprising man that he was, didn't feel like paying a different company. So he came a few miles down the lake and set up a port city here and called it Hawley. And Hawley originally was only existing for the ore from Cerro Gordo to come down here, get put on a boat, sent across, and then sent into Los Angeles. Then, in about 1879, a guy named Julius Keeler came to town. And Keeler thought, hey, this town could be more than it currently is. So he decided that he wanted to put up a mill, he wanted to map out a town, and that town is kind of what you see today. And Keeler, because of his enterprising ways, set up a mill. He set up all these things. He eventually bought one of the steamships that was sending the ore across the lake. But unfortunately, in 1882, that steamship burnt down. So that was a big blow. But Keeler had another wind. So in 1883, the railroad arrived in Keeler. That was a big day. The Carson, Colorado Railroad arrived, but unfortunately, they had missed the peak Cerro Gordo days. All of the ore coming down the hill was no longer. And so the story goes that one of the owners stepped off the train, looked around and said, we're either 300 miles too far or 300 years too early. And then 1913 was another very important year for Keeler. That's because that's the year that this lake, Owens Lake, started to be diverted into Los Angeles as part of the LA aqueduct program. And as this water receded, the people realized that the water here was very alkaline heavy, meaning there was all sorts of minerals that could be harvested and sold. So suddenly, Keeler started harvesting soda ash, baking soda, borax, and a few others. And that allowed them to put the railroad to use for a little bit longer. So as through the 1920s, 1930s, Keeler was kind of limping along. The deposits at Cerro Gordo were pretty much done by World War II. After that, the railroad here left in 1960. And since then, the town has shrunk pretty much every year down to its core residents that we have today. So the water that used to flow into Owens Lake all along the shore behind me now flows into Los Angeles as part of the LA aqueduct program. And water is huge. As LA was expanding, it would have never grown to the size it became without water. In the 20 years after the aqueduct was put in, the population of Los Angeles grew by 8x. So 8 times the population came after they had the water to feed all those people. And I think that's just so amazing. This lake bed is one that many people in Los Angeles drive by probably very often going up to Mammoth or different places and never think twice about. Or this hill behind me. these mountains, that tiny little town way up there called Cerro Gordo. The demand of that forced Los Angeles to develop quicker even before the aqueduct program. And so these forgotten histories are what gets me so excited. You know, that's the reason that I love being out in this area. I love making this channel. I love living in Cerro Gordo. I think because selfishly, understanding the importance of all these individual events and locations and areas helps provide better context for my experience here, but also just better context of not just the area, but California history in total. And so that's my goal. You know, with all of these videos, it's just to expose people to new histories that they might have not known about before. And hopefully some people watching go deeper down into the different rabbit holes, you know, go deeper into the history of Owens Lake, of Cerro Gordo, of the aqueduct program, of the Carson, Colorado Railroad, of Keeler, of all of these things. And people could spend literally their lifetime studying each of those things individually. But in this video, we're gonna try to scratch the surface just a little bit, and hopefully a few of you guys go into different rabbit holes and find some new passion and that joy that comes in discovery. And so with that, let's get into it. Probably the most recognizable building in Keeler these days is this. And this is the Sierra Talc Company mill. And back in the 1900s to about, 1940, California was the largest producer of talc for the country. And this mill is used in coordination with a mine called Talc City, which is a ways that way. And it was mined there, brought over here. And in this factory itself, they basically just refined and sacked it for shipment. And they would put it on the railroad and send it on its way. You know, these days it just remains kind of another testament to the past. I think it's a beautiful building. I think it's just kind of that same era of Cerro Gordo. But minerals like that were a big deal for this town. You know, they were trying to make a way to use the railroad, whether that was from the minerals off the lake, soda ash, baking soda, borax, everything like that, refining some of the ore from the different mines up there in the mountains, or this. And unfortunately these days it just mainly sits here. But we're gonna get a chance to look inside thanks to a kind Keeler resident, and I'll show you what remains of the Sierra Talc Company mill. All right, so we're at the top of the talc plant. Looking out. This thing must have been noisy back in the day. You can see here, these are sort of cloth, so I suppose it would go down in there to get sorted and go down. These days, a lot of pretty big animal poop. I assume owls. So this is inside. This is about the second floor of the talc plant. You can see the different funnels that they had to send it down to lower levels. These days, just a lot of dust, a lot of different scat, but it's incredible to think how many different lives and industries Keeler had, you know? There was the ore from Cerro Gordo up there. You know, then when that wasn't enough, they looked to the lake, you know? So they went out there and they used the alkaline lake to get soda ash, baking soda, talc, some borax, and all different things. And so this town, while most people might just pass by it on the map, is actually super interesting and historically relevant. And it just makes me think of how many places like that there is around California, America, the world. You know, these places where we just kind of take for granted and look past them. You know, everything tells a story. I mean, some people's whole life was living and working in this plant, you know. This is all they really knew. So next, we're gonna head up the hill. We're gonna go to the Four Metal Smelter. And that is the building that you see. If you're driving up Cerro Gordo Road, the stone building off to the right was a smelter that was developed in the Zinc era to refine some of Cerro Gordo's ore. Joining me there is going to be John Bowden. And John is a guy who has been a caretaker up at Cerro Gordo. He's lived in Keeler for a number of years, and he's just a wealth of information. So let's let John take it away.
I'm John Bowden. I've lived in this area up here for about 30 years. I've lived at Cerro Gordo, Swansea, and Keeler. We're standing right now on what was a 4 metal smelting company. The lake was being dried up around 1913. They started pumping the water out of here. And in the 30s, late 20s, early 30s, they put a plant down here and started pulling soda ash off the lake, and that was the last little boom for Keeler. But the zinc era was big enough. The end of the lead and silver into the zinc era, brought the railroad in here.
Yeah.
And we still have a terminus there in Keeler. Nothing else much happened up here after the 30s.
Yeah.
Until World War II, when industry and stuff shifted to war efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And the tramway at Cerro Gordo, salt tram, up north of us here, everything was being ripped out for the steel. Town of Keeler has survived mainly on a little bit of trade, smelting, shipping, whatever they could do. But the town never got much bigger than what it is today.
This is the end of the line railroad for the Carson, Colorado. And this arrived in 1883, and the owners up in Carson City thought that they were going to be able to capitalize on all of the ore coming out of Cerro Gordo. So they built a beautiful train that pulled right into here, and this beautiful station to service all of the ore. And unfortunately, they're a little bit too late. The heyday of Cerro Gordo had come and gone, but Cerro Gordo did have the zinc boom. So starting in about the early 1900s, the large zinc deposits that were found at Cerro Gordo provided some commerce for the railroad that used to come in right here. So much so that in 1916, the Los Angeles Times said that there was so much ore coming into Keeler that Main Street was just filled with ore waiting to come on this railroad. And unfortunately, that came and went, but another very important thing happened in 1913 for this railroad and for this town. And that was when Owens Lake began to start being drained. While this railroad station doesn't look the best, there are some local guys that know a lot more about this station and this train than I do, and they're actually bringing one of the trains back to life. And so for that, we're going to leave Keeler, head just up the road to Independence, California, where Dave Moe and his crew are restoring one of the original trains that used to pull right in here.
The history as I know it with this railroad, now this car that I'm sitting in right here was probably one of the original cars, although they all were kind of stepchildren from one railroad or another. Originally this railroad was thought up by the Silver Kings from the Virginia City, and they heard about a big bust down at Cerro Gordo. There was a big silver strike down there. They decided that they would build a railroad from the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, and then finally ultimately ended up in Keeler, which is the town right below Cerro Gordo. Only real problem they had with that in the 3 years or so that it took to build that, they got there in about 1883, the silver was pretty well all played out by then. There was still some zinc that was shipped out of there, and so the railroad didn't completely fail. They ran it from about 1883 until 1900, when the Southern Pacific Line, they put the Carson, Colorado up for sale. Southern Pacific Line bought it, and then ironically, they found silver in Tonopah, and they paid for the purchase price of the Carson, Colorado Railway in 1 year of hauling silver out of Tonopah. The poor guys just were at the right place at the wrong time, unfortunately. But Cerro Gordo for years had a tramway to come down off the hill, and they would actually ship, I believe it was limestone, they shipped zinc. There was still a little bit of silver coming out of there. So they were able to make a go out of it, but it was never as profitable as they had hoped it would be. Anyway, this locomotive was in surprisingly good shape. When we started tearing into it, of course the glass was broken on these two gauges. This was not, which is hard to believe. That's an probably 1911 when this rascal was built. Original steam gauge. The only thing that was missing was this handle right here, and when we cleaned out the inside of the firebox, it was down in the bottom.
My trip up to Independence to learn about the Carson, Colorado Railroad and the number 18 locomotive was probably the highlight of my month. You know, there's this group of guys up there that are just so passionate and dedicate their time to trying to preserve history. You know, it reminded me a little bit about the work parties that we have up at Cerro Gordo. You know, a group of people coming together with this common interest to try to bring this thing back to life. And this time I just felt so appreciative that they let me be on the other side of it, you know, to learn something new, to get into new skills that I never knew before. You know, they let me get out there and I could drive in some railroad spikes. I could try to bend the track, the 1/4 inch that needs to be bent so that way the cart can roll smoothly. I learned so much, and I think that anytime you're around a group of people with a shared passion, it's infectious. You know, it just makes you want to go there more and more. And so I just felt so grateful for my time that I got to spend up at Independence. I would tell you, if you're interested in the Carson, Colorado Railroad, please check out what they're doing up at Independence. You know, you can go to carsoncolorado.com. That's a great place to do it. But for me, it just brought me a little bit more into the community. You know, there's so much history in this area here in Keeler, up in Independence, that all ties into the history of Cerro Gordo. And so as my years progress at Cerro Gordo, I hope to spend more time, yes, preserving the history up there, but also venturing out in the surrounding community, becoming a bigger part of the community.
I'm Randy Babcock. I'm the vice president of this little organization, the Carson, Colorado. We're here in Independence. We've been for something on 25 years now. We've been working on this locomotive. It was retired by the railroad back in 1954, and it ran all up and down this valley, and built in 1911 originally. We went down there in the park back in the mid-90s and started working on this thing to restore it. It's been a long road in going, but since 2016 it's been in service. Today we were working this weekend on track, and we were working on a couple minor repairs for the locomotive for its next run. And in general though, we get together, you know, 4 or 6 times a year down here for hands-on. We run the engine a couple times a year typically. We're almost done with our track laying project. Brent's been helping us out quite a bit today. So
It's been fun.
We have a good time, and we've really it's been a lot of hard work put into this locomotive. You know, I mean, it cost about, not including the volunteer labor, if you were to put a dollar to it, it was probably about $250,000 in materials and stuff over mainly a 6-year period was the focus of it.
And right over here at the end of Cerro Gordo Road is the Keeler Beach and Swim Club. This was built in the 1920s for some of the locals to come, relax, hang out, enjoy the lake and the pool. You know, even some of the movie stars that would have been filming over in the Alabama hills, some of the old westerns, would come here. You know, there's this crazy photo of just people enjoying themselves in this pool back in the day. These days, like a lot of things from the past, it just sits here. You know, I imagine at one time this was somebody's whole hopes and dreams and world. You know, this was a place to come and be excited about, and now it sits here, and if you didn't know that it was here, you're not going to stop, you know. And the buildings, as you see, are falling down. The pool that was once full of excitement and movie stars has toxic dust and some plants growing in a wheelbarrow. But you can imagine back in the day, if you were able to sit here in the pool with a lake and that view, it must have been something else. This is probably one of my favorite things in Keeler. You know, I just love the colors, the feeling, the kind of energy that it has here. Maybe as Cerro Gordo begins rocking and rolling again, there's a need for a pool nearby for people to get off the hill and enjoy. And we can once again fill this place and have it be used. I hope that they're preserved for future generations to experience, not just on video, that's one way to do it, but forever, reinforced. And it's interesting walking out here. This field you see ahead of you used to be a lake, and that lake is the reason that we're here. All right, now that we understand all that, it's time to meet a very cool resident of Keeler, one of the best artists I've met in a very long time, a guy named Dan Dickman. And Dan has been living here for decades, and he just makes some of the coolest art you'll ever see. So let's go meet him.
I'm Dan Dickman. My training's fine arts. I just love the Western stuff, and so we've been here since about 1970. And so I did artwork and I actually worked in some of the mines and different things.
Yeah.
And on that course, on the backside of Cerro Gordo, there's a mine called the Belmont.
Oh yeah.
Which I'm donating a water jug, I assume water jug, from the Belmont mine. And myself and a friend named Alan, we worked up there in the very early 70s. This is a wonderful country for art, and a lot of great California artists and American artists have traveled to this area.
What do you call this type of art?
I call them liths, which is a Greek word for rock.
Okay.
The word I'd use is trying to show mass and kind of antiquity and kind of wonder. I lived here a year before I decided to buy property here, and decided that this was a pretty good place.
So that is Keeler and the Carson, Colorado River. I'm back here at the pool overlooking what used to be Owens Lake. And this week was so much fun for me. Keeler is a place I've been coming to very often for the last 2 years, but it never had resonance with me. I just kind of would come here, go to my little trailer, and leave. And I think just spending this week getting to know the history of it brought it to life for me. It makes it that much more important. It makes it that much more interesting and exciting every time I come down to Keeler. And the same thing with the railroad. The railroad is something I had heard of, sure, yeah, the Carson, Colorado, but I never really took the time or energy to research it. But now that I did, I just feel like I have such a better understanding and appreciation and excitement around these things that are right in my backyard. And I think that's the case everywhere. History is literally all around us. It's in your hometown, it's in every inch of it. And so I think if you're like me and you love history, which is probably why you're loving this channel, find that history at your home. Find that history all around you. Figure out why the park by your house is named after who it is. Find that historic building and research what used to happen there. Or even ask your family, to tell you a story they never told you before. I think all of that provides better context, and it just brings excitement to your day-to-day activities. I know that next time I'm walking down Keeler and I walk by the railroad, it'll be more important to me. It'll be more interesting. It'll just bring the whole place to life a little bit more. And I think we can all do that, no matter where we live, no matter whether we live in a abandoned mining town from the 1800s or not. This history is just everywhere. And so if I can leave you with anything this week, it's to get out there and just try to understand a little bit more of that history that is all around you. If you can do that, I promise you it's going to bring a smile to your face, a little bit more excitement, and just a little bit more context to your daily existence. I'm going to sit here, watch the sun set over Owens Lake, and think about all the other things I don't know about this place, all the things that there are still left to discover. And that's pretty exciting too. So I'll see you guys next time.